Hi, I'm Alyssa. Welcome to the Sewalong for VAVA Lingerie's high-waisted full-cut underwear. This is the detailed version of this sew-along. If you are a more experienced sewist, or if you're returning to this project and you just need a little refresher, there's a quickie version of the video that you may prefer and that I will link to below. Today I'm using a Tencel organic cotton stretch blend, and I'm going to begin by laying my fabric out in a single layer. I've pre-washed and dried this on high heat so that any shrinkage has already occurred. I'm going to lay my pieces out according to the key on my pattern, so that the fabric's stretchier direction is going across and the less stretchy direction is going up and down. To align my grain line, instead of using the selvage edge, I like to use the structure of the knit fabric itself. On one side of your jersey knit, you'll see that the fabric has these vertical lines running along its length. I'm going to line my ruler up with those and then adjust my pattern piece to it. So this Tencel fabric that I'm using is a little drapey and it can be a little difficult to work with. And you can see that I'm kind of working ahead of where I'm cutting, using my left hand to hold down the edge of the pattern and hold the fabric in place as I cut alongside it. This works great if you're using a rotary cutter, but it can also be helpful if you're tracing the outline of your pattern in chalk and then cutting it out with scissors. And then I'm going to mark my center, front, and back notches at the waist. I'm cutting my liner out of a plain organic cotton jersey, which I like as a lining material in general, but I'm also using a contrast in color here so that hopefully we can see the layers a little bit better for the sake of this video. So here are our three pieces, front, back, and liner, and we're ready to sew. Before I sew, I'm going to make sure that my machines all have a ballpoint or stretch needle, which has a rounded tip and is going to help to prevent any skipped stitches. If you have a serger, the first thing we're going to do is to finish this top edge of the liner piece. So that's the edge with these two pointed ends. This one down here with the notches is going to be our crotch seam. If you don't have a serger, you can just skip this step, no big deal. To get that pointy end started, I find it helpful to start with the presser foot of my machine up and to slide the end underneath the presser foot, underneath the needles, or as close as possible. Then I'm going to grab this thread tail here and just pull lightly as I start sewing to help that fabric start moving and make sure it doesn't get bunched up at the beginning. Okay, this next step is one that tends to trip people up a little bit. To sew our crotch seam, we're going to stack our pieces in this order. On the bottom, front, right side up. In the middle, back, right side down. And then on top of that, I'm going to stack my liner right side down. Your liner maybe doesn't have a front and a back side. It usually doesn't matter. But if there's a side of your liner that you want to see from the inside of the garment, put that facing down. Okay, so one more time. That's front and back, right sides together, with the liner on top of the back piece. You can sew all of the seams for this project using either your serger or the zigzag setting on your sewing machine. Either way, we're going to be sewing all of our seams using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Let's look at the sewing machine first. On my sewing machine, I'm using a fairly narrow zigzag stitch, about a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch wide and about 8 stitches per inch in length. I'm going to begin my seam with a little mini bar tack. Then I'm going to line up the ends of my fabric, sew across, and end with that same mini bar tack or a couple of straight stitches back tacked to secure the end of my seam. You can check to make sure that your zigzag stitching is stretchy enough by giving it a light tug to make sure it doesn't snap. If you need more stretch, try making your stitches just a little bit wider. To sew seams on my serger, I'm going to use a stitch length of R, which is between 1 and 2. Then just like before, I'm going to begin with my presser foot up, sliding my fabric underneath, and I'm going to use my thread tail to just get my fabric started so that it doesn't get caught or bunched up at the beginning. You'll want to leave a good 2 to 3 inch thread tail at each end of this seam that we'll use in the next step to secure the ends of the seam. Since you can't back tack on a serger, my favorite way to finish my serge seams is to send the thread tail back through the seam. I'm going to use a hand sewing or a darning needle to send my thread tail back through the end of the seam in between the layers of fabric. I'm going to pull the thread through for about an inch, and then I'm just going to trim away the excess and repeat at the other end of the seam. The next step is going to be to stitch down our liner to the front piece. So I'm going to lay my underwear open with the inside or wrong side facing up, take my liner and fold it towards the front piece. You'll see that this hides the seam allowance for your crotch seam really nicely in between the layers of fabric. And we're just going to stitch our liner down to our front piece along that top edge using a zigzag stitch, a little wider than before, anywhere between an 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch wide is great. And then this is what that looks like from the outside of your garment. To sew our side seams, we're going to fold the underwear closed, right sides together, so this will basically look like an inside-out pair of underwear at this point, with the liner visible on the outside. Just like before, you can sew these seams on either your sewing machine or your serger. I'm going to show the process on both machines because sometimes it's helpful to see how someone else handles or manipulates a difficult to work with fabric. If your fabric isn't feeding through as smoothly as you'd like, you may find you want to stop with your needle down and raise your presser foot to adjust it, and then continue sewing. When sewing seams on my serger, I like to sew both sides with the same piece on top. So in this case, I have my front piece on top. This means that I'm going to sew one side from the top down and the other side from the bottom up. And this is just going to help my seam allowances kind of want to fold the same direction, either both towards the front or both towards the back. And then I'm just finishing all 4 of my seam ends exactly the same way I did my crotch seam. So the body of our underwear is finished and we're ready to move on to finishing our waist and leg openings. The standard trim option for this pattern is a decorative elastic trim, but if you look in the back of your instruction booklet, you'll find directions for alternative trim options as well, and I'll link to tutorial videos for those below. Using a 1/4 inch decorative elastic, I'm going to cut 1 waist elastic and 2 leg elastics according to the chart in the instruction book. These numbers are a great starting point, but you may find that you want to adjust your elastic lengths depending on the stretch and pliability of the particular elastic that you're using. I'm joining all 3 of my elastics into the round using a straight stitch and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I like to back tack twice over my entire length of stitching to secure both ends well, and I find it a little easier to get my elastic lined up well if I start my stitching in the center rather than right at the edge. Next, I'm going to mark my elastics to help distribute them evenly as I sew them to the body of the underwear. I'm going to put aside my leg elastics for now and start by quarter marking my waist elastic. First, I'm going to mark the end opposite the cut ends and join. Then I'm going to line that mark up with my join and mark the halfway point on each side. So my waist elastic is now divided into 4 even parts. I'm going to mark my leg elastics according to the chart in my booklet, and because these need to be mirror images of one another, like my legs, I'm going to turn them so that the decorative edges are facing away from one another before marking them. Your elastics can also be installed using either your serger or the zigzag stitch setting on your sewing machine. If you're using your serger, you'll want to make sure to disengage your cutting knife so that it doesn't damage the edge of your elastic. On my serger, I'm going to use a longer stitch length, around 3, to reduce bulk. On my sewing machine, I'm going to use a wider zigzag, about a 1/4 inch wide. I'm going to begin with my waist elastic, matching the center back markup with the join in my elastic, and lining up the straight edge of my elastic with the edge of my fabric. We're going to be sewing these right sides together so that when we fold the seam allowance back towards the inside of the garment, just that decorative edge is showing. I want my stitching to hit right at the edge of the solid portion of my elastic. That way when I fold it back, I see all of the decorative portion and none of the solid portion. So again, beginning at the center back, I'm going to work around my waist, matching up my chalk marks with my side seams and with the center front. I'm just gently stretching my elastic here to match up with my fabric. Go as slow as you need here. There is a lot to keep track of between lining up your edges, making sure you're hitting the right spot on your elastic, and matching up your chalk marks. Elastic can feel really challenging to work with at first, but I promise that it will get easier and faster and more fluid with time. When I get to my second side seam, I'm just going to check and make sure to fold my seam allowance the same direction as the first one, either towards the front or towards the back. Work your way back around to where you started, again ending with that little bar tack. Remember how we marked our leg elastics with a longer half and a shorter half? The shorter side of the elastic is going to correspond to the back side of our leg opening, and the longer half will be attached to the front side. I'm going to start with the join in my elastic set about an inch forward of the crotch seam. This is to reduce bulk here, but it's also important to do if you're using that chalk mark to line up with your side seam and distribute your elastic. The fabric on the front side will be gathered into your elastic more, which is going to help the interior curve of your leg opening to lay flat, whereas the back side will be closer to a 1-to-1 ratio. When I get to my side seams, I'm going to make sure to fold my seam allowance the same direction as at the waist. The last step is going to be to fold the seam allowance of our elastics towards the inside of the garment and then top stitch them. I'm using the same stitch settings here that I did to install the elastic. I basically want it to be as wide as possible while staying within the seam allowance on the back side of the garment. So beginning at the center back, I'm starting with that little bar tack and then working my way around the waist. I'm stretching my elastic just a little bit less than I did on the first round, just enough to make sure that I'm not sewing any gathers or puckers into my fabric. If your elastics are coming out wobbly or stretched out, you may want to try using a walking foot, reducing the pressure of your presser foot, or reducing your stitch length slightly. You may also find that your machine tends to get stuck at the bulk of the side seams, leading to bunched up stitches like this. Oftentimes, a gentle pull from behind is enough to get you over the bulk, but placing a needle case underneath the back edge of your presser foot will help get you nice, clean, consistent stitches across your side seams. I'm ending my top stitching with another little bar tack, and then I'm just going to repeat the process for each of my leg elastics, beginning and ending at the join near my crotch seam. I hope you have so much fun making this pattern. Let me know if you have any questions. I can't stress enough how difficult these materials can feel to work with when you get started, and how much easier it gets with just a little bit of practice. Don't forget to check out the other trim options available. There are so many cool ways to really play with this pattern and make it your own. I would absolutely love to see what you've made. Share it with me using the hashtag VAVA Patterns, and find me online at VAVA Lingerie and VAVALingerie.com.